Once upon a time, there was a very bright student who loved the outdoors as much as her studies. She had a particular interest in plants, and she thought she knew everything there was to know about them. However, she missed the often untold story many high school students never get to hear. In class, she learned about the various parts of plants, from flowers to the xylem and phloem of their vascular tissue. From this, she thought she knew everything about how plants reproduced and how they grew. However, she was mostly just learning about angiosperms, or flowering plants. While it is true these plants dominate our gardens as well as our studies, they aren't the only type of plant in existence by far. Gymnosperms are another type of commonly observed plant, and they reproduce in a much different way than angiosperms. They do not produce flowers. Instead, they produce cones. On your average pine tree or conifer tree or spruce tree or whatever type of gymnosperm we're talking about, you see multiple types of cones than just the mature female cones. There are immature female cones as well as male pollen cones. Conifers aren't the only type of gymnosperm either. There are cycads and there are ginkgos. All of these plants reproduce using a seed but no flower. So now our student knows all there is to know about plants, right? Well, there are plants that don't even have seeds. There are seedless plants, such as pteridophytes. One of the most common type of pteridophyte is a fern, and they do not produce seeds. They produce spores, which you can find, well, not the spores, but the spore-producing structures on the bottom of their leaves. Horsetails and whisk ferns are other types of pteridophytes. Pteridophytes aren't the only type of seedless vascular plant. There are club mosses and there are spike mosses. While these guys have moss in their name, they are not true mosses simply because they have a vascular system. So, what type of plants don't have true vascular systems? Bryophytes. Bryophytes include mosses, which are perhaps my favorite type of organism. They have a very broad diversity in shapes, in relative sizes, and even in color. Bryophytes also include ballard liverworts, leafy liverworts, and hornworts. So now our student definitely knows everything there is to know about plant diversity, right? Well, there is one more very large group of plants that is yet untold. These are algae. Not all algae is microscopic. There is some macroscopic sea lettuce, which is a type of green algae. But most interesting, at least in my opinion, algae can be found under the microscope. These are all different types of growth structures green algae can have. They can be long and filamentous, they can be colonial and spiky. There's lots of different ways these green algae can look. So, intrigued by this diversity of plants and this whole new hidden world, our student investigated the greater phylogeny of plants, just to see how much more there is than just angiosperms. So this is a phylogenetic tree mostly focusing on green algae. There's other types of algae, such as brown algae, red algae, and pretty much a whole rainbow. But this is just looking at the green algae, which a very small part of that is the phytoland plants. And if we expand that, that's when we get to see our liverworts, hornworts, mosses, lycophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. So by looking at this, we can see the value in knowing about more than just angiosperms. If we were just to study angiosperms, we'd miss out on all the different ways plant life can exist. Finally, after learning all of this, our student knew way more than she knew before. Perhaps the most important thing she learned is that there is simply too much diversity in plants to ever really know it all.